I turned to the mirror and didn't recognize myself in reflection. There was a huge scar all over my face. It was convex and vile. I was a real freak, so no guy could like me. Thank God that scar is fake. I'm participating in an experiment from one fashion magazine. The goal is to see if I can find a boyfriend with such an ugly scar on my face in 3 days. If I manage, I'll get paid $1,000. My family was poor, and I couldn't dress cool and buy modern gadgets like everyone's. I felt a little outcast because of that. It's so humiliating being a beggar. Albeit beautiful, so I really needed that money. The curator forbade any way to insinuate that my scar was fake. If it popped up, then I definitely would never get the money. And every 3 hours, I had to send them my pics to chat so they make sure the scar was intact. But the thing was that I cheated the curators from the beginning. I have got a boyfriend, so it's sure to be easy money. I'm confident in my boyfriend Zach. He always said he would love me no matter what. I went to school, and everyone of course began to look back at me. Zach stood near the biology office and chatted animatedly with friends. "Zach, I'm here." Seeing me, he staggered off. I lied that I had an accident, and I said I loved him very much. But Zach replied with abomination that he couldn't date such a freak and just walked away. What? How? But he told me he would always be around. I had a hard time sitting out my lesson. But then I ran to the toilet. I wanted to get this makeup off sooner. And then I heard some girls whispering next to the stall. One of them said handsome Zach had finally dumped that freak and had already asked the main cheerleader out on a date. I was so bitter and resentful, but Zach would yet regret abandoning me. I came out of the toilet and confidently went to the gym. There was usually rugby team captain Chris practicing. He and Zach had long been at odds. I will win Chris, get money for the experiment, and at the same time, take revenge on Zach dating with his arch enemy. I walked up to Chris and immediately started flirting. That's what I knew. But he just rolled with laughter. He said that I was a beggar woman, and now with an ugly scar. What a jerk. I wanted to leave and pushed Chris, but he cornered me and started taking photos of me on the phone. Get off, Chris. That's enough. But he held me so tight that I couldn't even run away. But suddenly someone called out to Chris. That was the nerd from my class, Cody. He said the coach was looking for Chris everywhere. He let me go and quickly left. And I told the nerd Cody that I would have managed myself. Cody immediately apologized and said he just wanted to help and then offered a ride to the house. I didn't want to be seen with this loser. But I didn't seem to mind a car ride. And then it turned out he had a stupid bicycle. While we were on the way, I burned with shame, but it was better than listening to the chuckles of passengers on the bus. And Cody looked at me that and then. What are you looking at, loser? And then I thought, Cody was perfect for the experiment. I will quickly fascinate this muff and show the curators that I still found a guy. So when we drove up to my house, I asked him out on a romantic date in gratitude for the rescue. But Cody suddenly hesitated and said abruptly he was very busy in the evening and immediately left. I didn't believe my eyes. Did he just reject me? Damn. And I have little time until the end of the experiment. The next day at school was even worse. Everyone at school knew about my ugliness and called me names. And Zach began to avoid me and even hit a couple of times. But that's okay. I'll survive it. Now my goal is the nerd Cody. So I threw a nice note with 2 tickets to the cinema in his locker and wrote that I would wait for him after the lessons at the black door. As soon as the bell rang, I headed eagerly there. Cody will be mine. But local hooligans were standing there instead of Cody. They quickly looked over and the man ripped my backpack out of my hands. I tried to resist, but they grabbed me and held me while the ringleader searched for money in my backpack. And when he realized that there was nothing, he aimed it at a tree. Then I stepped on one guy's foot with all my strength and broke free. I wanted to take away my backpack, but I hurt my leg and bashed straight into the puddle. The guys only laughed loudly. When suddenly Cody appeared out of now here again. He so deftly knocked down the ringleader that the others immediately ran away. Look at you, nerd! He lifted me out of the dirt, took my backpack, and helped get to the bicycle. I asked him where he had learned this, to which he said he had once done karate. We were already late for the movie, so Cody offered to go home. This time I didn't mind. I even liked yesterday's bike ride. At home, Cody made me a compress from which the pain in my legs subsided. This was the perfect moment to get closer. I had already bent over to kiss him, but suddenly Cody pulled away and asked, where did I get that scar from? Was he dumping me again? And then Cody looked at me with sympathy and admitted that he understood what it was like to have a defect on the body, like no one else. What are you about? At this point, Cody unbuttoned his shirt and showed me a huge, ugly scar on his chest. I hadn't seen such in my life. It turned out that as a child, Cody underwent severe heart surgery, but the scar never went away. He was constantly bullied, and because of this, he even neglected his favorite occupation, swimming. Now he even did go to the beach so as not to undress. I suddenly became so embarrassed. I had only been scarred for 2 days, but I was really sick of the jeers, and the scar was fake, all for money. But for Cody, this was a real problem. At this moment, I received a reminder from the curator. Hurry up, there are only 2 days left. I realized there was an urgent need to act and invited Cody to the beach. When he saw me in a bikini, he would immediately agree to be my boyfriend. I began to say that scars should not prevent us from doing what we like, and that if I could walk around with a scar on my face, Cody should stop being shy too. I was scared that he would refuse me, but Cody said he had to think and would give an answer late in the evening. If he refuses, I won't get the money and everything was for nothing. So I was on edge all the evening. But suddenly a text came to me from Cody. He said he thought this through and would pick me up in the morning. The last day of experiment came in the morning and Cody and I went to the beach. There I began to strip to the swimsuit. Cody kept looking around and seemed very tense. I took his hand and said it wasn't as scary as he thought. He just had to decide once. Cody agreed and took off his shirt, but still tried to cover the scar with his hand. And that's where the ball came under our feet. It was Chris with his guys. They began to laugh at us and call us freaks from the Addams family. Cody immediately blushed, but I strongly took his hand. Let's go swimming, away from these dorks. We entered the water. Cody was delighted. It turned out he missed swimming a lot. We swam to a rock nearby that hid us from everywhere. Our eyes met, and Cody hesitatingly said he was in love with me in middle school. I did not expect this. He came close to kissing me, and I realized I didn't mind. But suddenly Cody changed in his face. Cody, what happened? I touched my scar, and I realized that silicone had peeled off the skin. I tried to stick it back, but it got worse. The scar just fell off my face. Oh no, I tried to explain to Cody about the experiment, but he didn't want to listen. He said he understood everything. I was with these rugby players and just wanted to expose him as an idiot. He immediately ran ashore and quickly left. Cody, wait! I came ashore and burst into tears at the understanding that Cody was the only one who treated me well. Even despite the scar and poverty, I messed it up. But at the same minute, the curator called via video link to find out the progress with the completion of the experiment and saw that there was no scar left. That's when the curator stated that they were depriving me of a cash prize. The experiment failed, but I didn't care. I cried for an hour and then headed home. And when I slammed the front door, someone knocked on it. It was Cody. He was proudly following me. But Zach was on the doorstep, my ex. He quickly began to assure that he realized everything. I was the most beautiful girl in the world. I just had to tell him about the makeup right away. But I just slammed the door in front of Zach. I was very angry at this hypocrite and didn't want to listen to his apology. Then I decided that tomorrow I would apologize to Cody. He was now more important to me than any gadgets and money. In the morning, at school, I started looking for Cody. He sat in the dining room. I sat down nearby and started apologizing. It was all a terrible mistake, but Cody ignored me and headed for the exit. I didn't know what to do. In the meantime, I noticed how other guys were looking at me with sympathy. Screw you all. I only need Cody. Then I climbed on the table, called him loudly, and in front of everyone admitted that he was the best person I had ever met. I wanted to be with him, and I apologized for deceiving him. But Cody didn't even turn around. Was he gone and we would never be able to communicate again? For the first time, I felt what it means when you lose a dear person. How suddenly Cody, pushing the crowd aside, climbed on the table and kissed me. Everyone around clapped and loved. I put my hand on Cody's chest and felt the scars, and suddenly I realized that the heart of an incredibly beautiful person was beating behind them. I whispered, "It doesn't matter what you have outside and what you look like. The main thing is what a soul you have." At the same moment, I received a text from the curator about a new experiment. I need to spend a year in a relationship without quarrels. I agreed and thought, what if Cody and I could live like this all our life? I was lying on an operating table in the garage that smelled of mildew. Maybe it's not too late to give up, but it took me so long to get there. No, I have to become an anime beauty. The surgeon held up a mask with anesthesia. All I had to do was to breathe in and wake up a different person with a new face. It all started a month ago when Chris was transferred to our class. That's a pretty boy. Blue eyes, bangs. He looked like a character from an anime. But I immediately realized that I was not going to get anything. I was dark, short, and I could not even put two words together at the sight of a pretty guy. And suddenly Chris, walking to his seat, smiled at me. I immediately blushed. Did he really pay attention to someone like me? If this was the case, then I had a chance to communicate with him or even. But how? I immediately asked for advice from Steve, my next-door neighbor and only friend. But for some reason, Steve got upset and mumbled that I shouldn't worry. It was enough to be myself. So much for the advice. Chris instantly became friends with all the cool guys in the class. They were always hanging out together, and I was even afraid to get close to him. It was only at the end of the week after school that he stayed in class for a while. This was my chance. I saw a beautiful sticker with an anime girl on his phone. Went up to him and asked what it meant. Chris immediately replied that it was the emblem of the anime fan club that he headed. I wanted to continue the conversation, but then Chris was called by his friends from the class and ran away. I followed him out. My friend Steve was waiting for me in the hallway, and we went home together, as usual. All the way I kept talking about Chris being an otaku. And then I came up with a wild idea. If I looked like an anime girl from a sticker, then for sure he would like me. Steve remained silent. Strange. He was usually more talkative. But suddenly he blurted out, since this Chris was so important to me, he would help. A friend of his worked at an anime store, and Steve would arrange a discount for me. Cool. I went straight there after school. I picked up a bunch of different clothes and a special shiny powder. The next day, everyone in the class looked at me in disbelief. I was embarrassed to be standing in the middle of the hallway in an anime outfit myself, but it was all for Chris. Then Chris himself came up to me. I was happy. But he said that the outfit did not suit me, and I looked in it like a parody of his favorite anime. There were chuckles all around. He was right. I was ugly. I was so devastated that I didn't even go back to class. I went home and turned on an anime to see what I had done wrong. But after that, it became even more painful. The cartoon girls were beautiful, with perfect figures, small noses, and huge eyes. If only I could look like them. In desperation, I went to wash my face, and then I saw an advertising flyer in the basket. My mother must have picked it up on the way home. It showed that with the help of a special tape, you can adjust the shape of the nose and eyes. Bingo! I rushed to the store, and then I worked all evening and in the morning. I looked just like those anime beauties. The tape tightened the skin terribly. I was afraid that it would fall away and furtively touched my face. I ran into Steve in the hallway, but instead of complimenting me on how much I had changed, he asked dumbfounded what I had done to myself. Get off me, Steve. You don't understand anything. So much for the friend. The physical education class was beginning. When I appeared in the hall, everyone gasped, and Chris immediately came up to me and even offered to run together. It worked. We were chatting, and I tried not to show my excitement, but when Chris invited me to a party in 3 weeks, I almost fell over. Of course, I told him yes. We made a circle around the room. I was sweating. Sweat was even running down my face. And then Chris looked at me strangely. What's wrong? It turned out that the damn tape had peeled off and was dangling. It was a failure. I tried to run away and carefully asked Chris if his invitation was still valid. But he just grinned and brazenly said that now he would invite me if only I would have plastic surgery, and he was sure that this would not help me either. Then he defiantly left. I was desperate. At home, I locked myself in my room, and I was afraid to even look at my ugly face in the mirror. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and I rushed to open it. Maybe it was Chris who came to apologize, but of course not. How naive I was. Steve stood in the doorway, flowers in hand. He kept saying I was beautiful, which made me even angrier. I am ugly, and you need to see a doctor to check your eyesight. He wanted to say something else, but in a fit of anger, I slammed the door. I turned off my phone and watched anime for days. I kept thinking about Chris. I dreamed about him, and I even woke up screaming his name. It seemed I was obsessed with him, or maybe I was sick. Soon, YouTube gave me a new video. The heroine of the show was a woman who had dozen surgeries, and she looked like a monster. Yes, there are people. Stop! So after all, you can probably make anyone out of yourself, and even an anime character? And then the thought of the surgery took me seriously, and I immediately remembered Chris's last words. The party was 2 weeks away. I'll make it, and then Chris will be mine. The very next day, I rushed to call the clinics. But no one would operate on me because of my age. Well, no, I just wouldn't give up. I got into the darknet. Here I could definitely find everything. And I came across the website of a doctor. He was working illegally. I was scared, but I decided to call him anyway. The doctor agreed to operate on me, but it cost $500, and where could I get that much money? Then I remembered that in the anime store where I bought clothes, there was an ad urgently needed animator. I rushed there, but there was already a whole crowd of youngsters dreaming of getting this place. It was easy money. I had no choice but to call Steve. The shop was run by an acquaintance of his. I lied to him that I needed money for cute anime shoes. Steve listened in silence and said dryly that he would help, but only if I went to the party with him and not with Chris. I almost choked. We're friends, but there was nothing to do, and I agreed. An hour later, I was already pulling a Totoro costume. It's one of the cult heroes of anime. If I distributed leaflets for 12 hours a day, I would collect the necessary amount in a week without any problems. But after an hour on the street, I was ready to give up. It was very hot in the suit. Besides, they didn't take any single leaflet from me. A block from the store, I came across the fairground. Here I met great success. The flyers were being snapped up, but suddenly someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned to see a huge man in a similar Totoro suit standing in front of me. He said it was his territory, and I'd better get out. I don't think so, damn Totoro. Then a fight broke out between us. We are lying on the ground, awkwardly squirming in these suits, until our boss came running at the noise. I thought he was going to punish the bastard, but he just threw me out without paying a cent. I trudged home, smearing sweat and dirt on my face. And where could I earn money for the surgery? It's over. When I got home, I automatically reached into the closet for clean clothes. Then the only clothes from the store fell out on me, from where I was kicked out in disgrace. I shuddered with hatred for the boss. I worked through the day in a stupid suit, and he didn't even pay. What should I do? Time was short and I needed money for the surgery. And then I remembered that when I was changing, he closed the cash register, and it was full of money. I think I have a plan. And at that moment, Steve called, just in time. I told him everything. I didn't get paid at the damn store, which meant he wouldn't be partying with me, unless he was going to help me in the robbery. Steve was horrified and tried to talk me out of it. Then I called him a coward and hung up. Handsome Chris would definitely not behave like this. Well, I would do it myself. I found an crowbar in my father's garage and went to the store that evening. After waiting for the boss to lock the door, I put on the mask of the anime villain, Shishio Makoto, and crept to the window. And then someone took me by the shoulder. I was stunned with fear. Steve was standing behind me. He took the crowbar from me, saying that the whole neighborhood would come running at the sound of the glass, and handed me the keys. He managed to steal them from his friend. Wow, Steve, did you decide to help me? We quickly entered the store. I grabbed the money, and we immediately left. Half an hour later, we were walking home through the park, and I was so happy. In my joy, I even blurted out to Steve that now I had enough for the surgery. I would be a real anime girl. Hearing this, Steve turned pale, and he said that he understood everything. I used him. After that, Steve turned around and quickly went home. For a second, I wondered if I'd done the right thing with Steve, but I tried to push all these thoughts away. Soon, Chris would appreciate my efforts, and I definitely wouldn't worry anymore. The next day, I went to the surgeon. I exhaled and walked into the garage where my surgery was supposed to take place. Man, what a measly hole. I hoped I didn't get infected with something here. The lamp blinked, and the anesthetic mask looked like an instrument of torture. I lay down on the table and squeezed my eyes shut, and the surgeon held up a mask with anesthesia. Am I doing this just to please some guy? I thought at the last second. Suddenly, there was a crash. Someone broke in the door. It was Steve. He shouted at the surgeon to get away from me and that he was going to call the cops and literally dragged me out of the garage. I resisted, but then Steve pulled his phone out of his pocket. What kind of nonsense was this? But then I saw how in a fresh video, Chris made fun of my photos and anime costumes in front of his friends. He said they got to him by constantly trying to become an anime girl. But I was just a freak. Something inside me snapped. Oh my god, all this time, he was just making fun of me, and I almost disfigured myself. But then the cops came running out of the dark and handcuffed Steve. The owner of the anime store recognized him from the camera footage, and Steve was tracked down. No, wait. I saw Steve being led away and I knew he was doing everything for me. But now they were going to take him to the police because of me. I made up my mind and I shouted at the cops that I'd made Steve do it for me. After that, we were taken to the police station together. I was very afraid that we would be sent to prison, but since we were minors, we were eventually given a month of correctional labor. On the first day, we carried bags of garbage, but even here, Steve tried to help me. At the end of the day, it started to rain and we were exhausted waiting for the bus. It looked just like a shot from Totoro. I wanted to say this to Steve, but he suddenly turned to me and kissed me. And suddenly, despite my appearance, I felt the happiest in the world. And I realized that all this time, there was a person who appreciated and accepted me for who I was. I cried with happiness. At that moment, the bus arrived. Did you like the video? Then subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you.
The orderlies were holding my hands tightly to the operating table, and the surgeon was already administering anesthesia. I tried to pull away, shouting, "I don't want to be a girl, wait!" But I was blacking out, and it was all my parents' fault. We were never a rich family, because even before I was born, Dad lost all his money in the casino. When Mom found out about this and realized that a child would be raised in poverty, her sick heart could not stand it. She fell seriously ill. Despite this, Mom always tried to give me the best. While Dad was looking for a part-time job, she was there. So I decided I couldn't bear to see her suffer. I would earn a lot of money and help my parents get out of poverty. And the first thing I needed was to pay our debts. As soon as I finished school, I decided to go to the factory. They paid well, and no education was required. But when I went to the boss and explained that I wanted to work for him, he suddenly laughed in my face and said, they did not need such frail, effeminate boys. It was like I was slapped in the face. I clenched my fist in frustration. Yes, I was not a muscular, handsome guy. Why insult me? Disappointed, I went home. My parents were whispering in the kitchen. Dad was actively convincing Mom of something. I was wary, and then I heard a passage. Finally, we will get rich. I immediately remembered how Mom told me that, with the same words, Dad took everything out of the house, from the TV to the dishes, because of his addiction. We became beggars. I rarely got new clothes, and I went to school in rags. Therefore, my classmates did not miss the opportunity to offend me, calling me a street rat. I always wanted to get out of poverty. After all, only then we will finally be happy. I sighed. Everything was in my hands. All night I studied vacancies, and in the morning I went to get a job as a waiter. Although the salary was low, I was hoping for a good tip, but even here, the boss asked skeptically if I had any experience. My palms were sweating as I quietly replied that I had never worked before. This was the end. I wouldn't be hired, but the boss chuckled. So be it. You'll go on probation. I broke into a smile. Got it. Finally, we would break out of poverty. I wanted to jump for joy and immediately ran home to tell Mom everything. We would be happy, but suddenly, my dad stopped me on the threshold, and he smiled enigmatically. He had a present for me. Present? Dad immediately handed me a large box. I hesitantly opened it and what, was this a joke? There was a woman's wig inside. Dad, are you completely out of your mind? There's no money and you're wasting it on nothing. I got angry and went to my room. I spent the next week at the cafe doing my best, staying late, trying to please the guests as much as possible. So I was constantly left with big tips. I was so happy about it. I hid everything I earned in the locker room, and soon a good amount of money accumulated there, enough to pay off the debts. After work, I returned home inspired and again saw Dad with burning eyes convincing Mom. This will definitely work. We'll finally have the money. I clenched my fists. Was he talking about the casino again? I immediately went up to them and shouted that we did not need any of his super earning schemes. I earned my money in an honest way, and now we had money. And just in time, in a week, the payment period expired. We could lose our house. But Dad just chuckled in disbelief. Well, where's your honest money? I don't see them. I gritted my teeth. You would see tomorrow. In the morning, I went straight to work and to the locker room, but as soon as I got to the locker, my heart sank. The lock was open. It was impossible. I remember that I locked the locker. With trembling hands, I opened the door. There was no stash. I immediately rummaged through all the things, but in vain. Despair washed over me. Someone stole everything. This wasn't supposed to go unpunished. I immediately went to the boss's office, but as soon as I told him, he snorted that it was my own fault. I was beginning to get a bit anxious. It was my money. The thief had to be found, but the boss just said that I was acting like a girl, and I looked the same, and I couldn't stand it anymore. How dare he say that? I shouted in anger that he was an idiot who didn't care about his employees, but he didn't seem to care about me at all. You're fired, the boss gritted out. And only this phrase brought me back to reality. I frantically tried to justify myself, but the boss was adamant. This was the end. I lost my job and my money. What should I tell my parents? When I entered, Dad asked where the money was, and I just looked away in confusion. He understood everything and smiled triumphantly. Dad knew that there were no options other than his way of earning money. He added mockingly, "Son, go try on the dress. Soon you'll be wearing only them." What was he talking about? He was mocking me, but for some reason, Mom was hesitating. God, how much could she trust Dad? After all, he only promised to earn money and then he lost everything. I didn't say anything and went back to my room, slamming the door behind me. Couldn't sleep all night because of my nagging thoughts. Where could I get the money now? How could I pay for our debts? It seemed that all was lost and I was forever mired in poverty. I fell asleep only in the morning. Dad woke me up and told me that Mom needed to go to the hospital urgently to get medicine, and of course he did not have time because he was going to the next part-time job. I quickly packed up and went outside. Mom was already waiting for me at the bus stop, and together we boarded the bus. We drove longer than the usual, which seemed strange to me, and Mom was sitting there with a pained expression on her face. I gently took her hand and asked if everything was alright. Mom shuddered and looked at me rather sadly. She started to say something, but then just nodded and turned back to the window. When we arrived at the clinic, I was confused. It was modern, large, and not at all like an ordinary hospital. It was kind of weird. We went inside. It was a long drive, and I had to go to the bathroom. I asked Mom to wait for me in the hallway, and then I turned into the restroom. A strange feeling never left me for a second. I went to the sink to wash my face when someone called out to me. He was a young guy, but very feminine. His voice was high, his waist was narrow, and his features were more like a girl's. The guy asked, "Oh, were you a girl too?" The question confused me. What did he mean? Then the guy impatiently explained, "Well, are you here for a sex change operation, or it's already done?" What kind of sex change? I didn't understand anything. We weren't the usual. Wait. Then images flashed before my eyes. How Dad gave me a wig and hinted at dresses. How he persuaded Mom to do something. It meant I looked in horror at a guy who looked very feminine, and he had breasts. Yes, he was a girl. This was not a hospital, but a plastic surgery clinic. Did my parents want to change my sex? I ran into the corridor. No, I didn't agree to the operation. I had almost reached the exit when Dad appeared at the entrance and, seeing me, shouted, "Catch him!" Oh no, one of the orderlies blocked my path, and the other wrung my hands. I didn't even have the time to react, and they were already dragging me down the corridor. I tried to pull away, but just before I entered an office, I met my mom's eyes. She was almost crying, but she wasn't going to save me. What was going on? I started to struggle, but the orderlies were twice my size. They dragged me into the operating room and put me on the table. "I don't want to be a girl, wait!" I was shouting, but the doctor was already administering anesthesia. I felt my eyelids grow weak, and I struggled less every second. That's how I ended up in this operating room. I gave up and was sure that I would wake up as a girl. But at that moment, Mom ran into the operating room. With tears in her eyes, she screamed to stop the operation. Then suddenly, she clutched at her heart and fell into the floor. My stomach twisted with terror. Mom, no! I wanted so much to help her, but the anesthesia was already taking effect. Without realizing it, I blacked out. I came to myself in the ward and vaguely remembered what had happened. Oh my god, Mom! I immediately jumped, looking for her with my eyes. Was she alright? And then someone grabbed my arm. I whirled around. It was Mom. She was sitting next to me and her eyes were full of tears. Dad was there too. And he seemed a little bit down. I breathed a sigh of relief. Mommy, I'm so glad you're alright. In response, he gently stroked my hair. Son, I'm sorry, Mom sobbed. Didn't mean to do this to you. And then I suddenly remembered everything. Relief was replaced by resentment. Why did they want to change my sex? Dad sighed. He'd met a man in a bar a few weeks ago. He said that he was looking for a beautiful girl, and if Dad brought him one, he would give the family a large sum of money. What kind of nonsense was this? What did that have to do with me? Then Dad hesitated. I was very feminine and beautiful. The only obstacle was my sex, which was just worth changing. He had a hard time getting Mom to do it. When she heard my screams, she knew she'd made a mistake. It was good that the operation was stopped. After all, the man turned out to be a fraud, and he was not going to give any money. With such a scheme, he simply found beautiful girls. I was in shock. So Dad wanted to make me a girl for the money? I couldn't believe it, but I couldn't be angry at my mom's tears. She had done so much for me. I sighed and smiled reassuringly. The main thing was that the parents realized their mistake. After we were discharged from the hospital, we went to the police station and told them in detail about this fraudster. He said that he had found a girl and would bring her to him. And now is the girl, wearing a wig and a new dress. However, the fraudster did not have the time to check out my beauty. Almost immediately, he got busted. And we, having received a substantial reward for the assistance of the police, immediately paid off our debts and paid for Mom's treatment. I always thought that we would only be happy with money, but now I realized that happiness is a family, people who will always be there, and not the wealth at all. Did you like this video? Then subscribe and like it. Support the channel, folks. Thank you so much.
I was walking on a tightrope at a height of 10 meters. The audience held its breath. A blind gymnast under the very dome of the circus performed the trick without a net. I did a somersault, but the lenses made it hard to see. I almost fell down. The audience burst into applause. Back in the dressing room, I rushed to the mirror to get those stupid white lenses off. Everyone thought I was blind, but that was a lie. My father was a circus director, and he thought that for the sake of a blind gymnast, the audience was willing to pay 3 times more. Ever since my mom died, he had gone off the rails and made me pretend to be blind. I wanted to study at the circus school and become a world star. My father made a condition. If I wanted to leave, I had to earn $100,000 and give it to him, then I would be free. But such a sum was simply unrealistic for me. Dad was waiting for me in the dressing room. He shook the bills and menacingly said that the audience was not enough, all because I did not smile at anyone. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. I barely had time to put on my sunglasses. A tall, curly-haired guy stood in the doorway. He was so beautiful that I was even taken aback. The guy introduced himself as Ed and said with a bored look that he worked for a foundation to help the blind. They had a grant. And now they were choosing who the fund would allocate money for sight restoration, about $100,000. I didn't understand anything, but my father suddenly jumped up to Ed and began to shake his hand, repeating that we agreed to everything. And he added that Ed should definitely come to us for breakfast the next morning. I was taken aback, and so was Ed apparently, but he said he would come. As soon as Ed left, my father said sharply that I had to get this grant at any cost. But on the other hand, I finally had a chance. Maybe because of this, I could get closer to my dream. The next morning, Ed came to our house. Over tea, he lazily said that there were several candidates for the grant, especially since scammers often wanted to get the money. So he would ask me a few questions about my illness. My father glared at me, and I quickly agreed. He felt the tension and suggested that we go to the park next to the house. On the way, Ed read everything from a piece of paper. Not really listening to me. I tried to keep it interesting, to charm him, but the next question was, "What's your relationship with your mom?" A lump rose in my throat. Is something wrong? Asked Ed. I gathered my thoughts and told him. My mother was a gymnast, but she failed during a performance. Then I promised myself that I would become a star and conquer the world in memory of my mother. At that moment, a guy rushed by, throwing mud at me. This isn't a bike lane. Ed froze and asked me how I knew a bike had passed us. Damn it. I lied that my hearing had improved after losing my sight. The way Ed looked at me. What if he realized I was lying? Then my alarm went off. I had to run to practice. I had to work hard if I wanted to be a star. Suddenly, Ed said that he would go with me. He would make a video for the foundation with my training. I was very surprised, but I agreed. Surely this would help me get a grant. I was very worried because in training, I did not pretend to be blind. But right now, I needed to be very careful. Under the dome of the circus, I did the most daring acrobatic tricks. And Ed looked at me with admiration for the entire 3 hours. In the evening, as soon as I went home, my father immediately bombarded me with questions. Did you get the money? When I told him everything, he suddenly shouted that I was stupid. I must have given myself away. I was hurt so bad. Dad, I'm trying my best. In tears, I ran to my room. The next morning, my father burst into my room without knocking. He told me to get ready right away. Ed was waiting for me downstairs. My father wouldn't let me miss a second chance. As soon as I came down, Ed immediately said that he was impressed with my perseverance and added that training was training. But sometimes I needed to relax, and he decided to take me to the ocean. I couldn't believe it. It was only a 3-hour drive to the ocean, but my dad never took me there. On the way, Ed started talking. Turned out that he grew up in an orphanage, but as soon as he graduated, he immediately rushed to explore the world. Even now, he was saving up for a trip around the world, which was why he worked part-time at the foundation. I thought about it, and I had never been farther than our town. I spent all my free time training. We pulled up the gas station, and Ed went to pay for the gas. And then I saw something in the glove compartment of his car. Could it be a real police badge? Hell, if Ed was a cop and he had been trying to check on me all this time, then soon everyone would know about my deception. My father and I would end up in jail. I heard Ed approaching the car and slammed the glove compartment shut. The main thing was to behave as if nothing had happened. We sat in silence by the ocean. I was afraid to say anything, and Ed looked thoughtfully into the distance. Suddenly he asked, when I swam in the pool the last time. Why this question? Then Ed suddenly took my hand and started dragging me into the water. I didn't want to. I would get wet, but he said it would do me good. He was here and nothing would happen to me. We jumped in the waves and Ed didn't let go of my hand. For the first time in many years, I had so much fun. When we got ashore, Ed got a call. He hung up the phone and said in a drooping voice that the foundation had refused me the money for the surgery. I was silent, and the tears came to my eyes. But why? Ed began to reassure me. I think the money was given to some kid. But he said that he was amazed at my persistence and was sure that I was worthy of the surgery. He was sorry the foundation didn't have another grant for me. I returned home, not knowing how to tell my father. It was dark in the room when I noticed my dad. He was sitting in a chair and glaring at me. I burst into tears. Dad, the foundation refused to help me. My father was very angry and shouted that if I missed the grant, I would pretend to be blind for the rest of my life and clean the elephant enclosures in the evenings. No more gymnastics. I was taken aback. Dad, why are you doing this to me? All night I clenched my fists in frustration. What should I do? My father would never let me go without money, and I was not going to give up on my dream. In desperation, I dialed Ed. He quickly picked up the phone and said that he was going to call himself. It was so strange, but I immediately blurted out that I needed help. We need to meet urgently. Ed was silent, but suddenly he said that he would come to me in an hour. A car honked outside a window. I slipped past my father's bedroom and out into the courtyard. I sat down and Ed said we weren't going to talk here. I needed to calm down. We arrived at some building. It was a road restaurant. Then we went inside and sat down at one of the tables. Ed immediately ordered tea for me. God, how was I going to tell him everything? It was terrible, but I had to admit that no one but Ed could save me. Just when I worked up the courage to speak up, Ed interrupted me. He handed me the money and said that he had collected it for a trip around the world. Ed added that it would be enough to live the life I really wanted. What do you mean, Ed? And then I heard a bell behind me. What's going on? I saw my father in the doorway. Not again. He was getting closer, and I was already preparing for the worst. Then my father stopped. I realized that he had noticed the money on the table. My father snatched the bills and told me I had to go home right away. I didn't have time to say anything, and Ed looked dumbfounded. In the car, Dad was counting the money, but suddenly he said that he had changed his mind about letting me go. After all, the image of a blind circus girl could bring him a lot of money, and the maintenance of the circus was very expensive. Outraged, I didn't know what to say. My blood boiled. Dad, you can't do this to me. But Dad said sharply that I didn't dare to contradict him. I was still a child, and I would work in the circus for as long as he said. Tears welled up in my eyes from the hurt. My dream was ruined, but the worst part was that I cheated on Ed, the only person who treated me with kindness. I had to give him the money back, and then run away from my dad, the circus, and everything that had been dragging me down for so many years. In the morning, I heard my dad slam the door. I was home alone. I immediately jumped out of bed and went to his office, to the safe. My hands were shaking. Carefully, I began to sort through the codes. Father's date of birth, a failure. So, what about my mom's? Another failure. Damn, if it doesn't work now, the alarm will go off. I gathered my strength and entered my year of birth. And wow, it worked. Carefully, I took the money. And then the lock clicked at the bottom. My father was back. I barely managed to hide the money in my suit bag. My father shouted to me from below that it was time to leave. They were already waiting for us at the circus. I was trembling with excitement. I had never gone against my father before. I was going to run away right after the performance. And finally, my performance was announced. But when I got on stage, I noticed Ed in the back row. What was he doing here? He looked me straight in the eye. I stopped for a second and then continued walking towards the rope. But at that moment, I remembered his phrase. You can live as you want. Then I turned around and went to the microphone. And then I took off my white lenses. The hall hummed in shock. I apologized and said I couldn't live in deception anymore. All this time, I was just pretending to be blind. But recently I met someone who showed me that we really decided how we lived. I looked at Ed. Then my furious dad ran out into the arena and began to shout and swear. He was already running up to me. My stomach clenched. I didn't know what to do, but suddenly the police burst into the hall. God, I'm about to get arrested for fraud. But the cops were on their way to my dad. And then one of them snapped the handcuffs on his hands. What's going on? Ed ran up to me, and I was confused and begged his forgiveness. I added that I was surprised he hadn't brought me to the station himself. Ed didn't know what I was talking about. I know you're a cop, Ed. I saw the badge in the glove compartment. Suddenly, Ed laughed. He said it was a fake. He was playing a prank on a friend once. I couldn't believe it. And then Ed added that he'd figured it out a long time ago, but he was waiting for me to tell him. And after my confession, he realized that he was not mistaken in me, and he invited me to go around the world with him. After all, it seemed that my father would no longer be able to hold me hostage. I'm telling the story on the shore of the Pacific Ocean. Ed and I have already traveled to 50 countries. And this morning, I got a letter from the circus school. I got in. I hope now I can perform that difficult trick. And with it, I can become a world star in memory of my mother. With trembling hands, I removed the bandages from my face. The audience of the beauty contest froze with tension. You're the best! My mom shouted from the first row. Finally, I opened my face, and the audience gasped. And my mom suddenly clutched her heart and fell. No, this wasn't how it was supposed to end. And it all started with a letter a couple of weeks ago. Dear Marie, we are happy to inform you that you have passed the exam. It took my breath away. I got into the most prestigious college in the country. I wanted to become a biologist and dreamed of my own laboratory. But my mom was more interested in what outfit I would like to go to school to and what hair color was popular this season. She was obsessed with looks, unlike me. Because of this, we constantly quarreled. Therefore, when I received the letter, I did not rush to my mom. But suddenly I realized that without her signature on the documents, I would not be accepted. Maybe I could give them during her evening spa. My mom would sign it without looking, and it was all over.
That settled, I carefully walked over to Mom. She was sitting in a massage chair, wearing a cucumber mask. She was so relaxed that she wouldn't notice anything. I held out the document. It's for a biology class. I need a signature. My palms were sweating with excitement, but I held on. Mom said she would sign it, but first, a surprise. A surprise? I tensed. I didn't usually like Mom's gifts. You're going to a beauty contest, she happily reported. Was this a joke? I had more important things to do. And then Mom took the cucumbers from her eyes and began to carefully read the documents. Oh no! Mom was silent, and my heart was pounding. The minutes dragged on forever, and suddenly she smiled. What? Was she not angry? My mom calmly said that I could go to college, but with a condition. I had to win the beauty contest. What? Scientists don't walk the runway in bikinis. I ran to my room, slamming the door behind me. I couldn't sleep all night. My mom in her youth constantly participated in contests, but she did not manage to get the first place. Then she was pregnant with me, and the jury considered her overweight. How she wanted to take it out on me, and if I refused, goodbye college. In the morning, I woke up to my mother banging into my room. She blurted out that she had spent the whole night looking at photos of the finalists of beauty contests and found out what facial features were in fashion. And then she said that I didn't meet the ideal. But it's fixable, she continued calmly. You just need to fix your nose a little and raise eyelids. What? Mom, are you out of your mind? And then she blurted out that she had already signed a contract with the clinic. I was beside myself with anger, but my mom immediately reminded me of the condition. Without the finalist's crown, there would be no signature for the college. Heck, gritting my teeth, I agreed. I would figure out how to get out of it. We got into a taxi, and I looked at myself in the driver's mirror. My nose is normal. Surely the doctor will say the same thing. But as we drove up to the hospital, I noticed big security guards at the entrance. Strange. Why are they here? My mom led me into the doctor's office, Dr. Strange, and he immediately looked me up and down. Surely he couldn't find any flaws in me. And then Strange said that my nose was really a little crooked, and the eyelids drooped. Alright, that's enough. There was no way I was going into surgery. Then I had an idea. I whispered to my mom that I'd left my lip balm in the car. They are so cracked, and this is unacceptable for a future beauty queen. My mom looked at me incredulously. But then she broke into a smile. At last, I was listening to her advice. When she left, I immediately opened my backpack, took out all my money, and handed it to the doctor. Let's lie to my mom that I have contraindications. But the doctor glared at me and ordered me to put the money away. I begged him to help me, but he didn't say anything. Then Mom was back. Damn it. I barely had time to put the money away. I was afraid that Dr. Strange would tell her everything. And all he said was that we could go. Did I really succeed? And then, instead of leaving the hospital, my mom took me to one of the wards. What? My mom said that the surgery would take place in 3 days, and in the meantime, I would be in the clinic. No, I'm not staying here. Ignoring my mom, I was already heading for the exit, when suddenly the road was blocked by those same big guards. What's going on? The guards led me to the ward. My mom shouted that I would thank her. I tried to pull away and couldn't believe it was happening. My mom locked me in the clinic to perform a surgery against my will. I pushed into the ward. Then the nurses immediately appeared and began to pull off my clothes. I struggled as best as I could, but soon I was in my hospital pajamas. The nurses took my clothes and left. I looked around, and the girls in the ward were bandaged, just like mummies. Some had tubes sticking out from under their bandages, dripping with a nasty liquid. I need to get out of here now. For a couple of hours, I pretended to be asleep while I listened to the guards' footsteps and calculated when they were going around the corridor, but I would be caught right away in my hospital pajamas. The neighbors were snoring softly in their beds. Of course, they weren't brought here by force. Stop. So no one took their clothes, and it could be borrowed. Trembling with excitement, I crept to the nightstand of one of the patients and opened the door. The nightstand creaked softly, and the girl rolled over on her side. Her bandaged face was right in front of mine, but then the neighbor sniffed again. What have I come to? I hurriedly changed my clothes, and soon I was creeping down the hall if only no one would hear. There were only a couple of meters to the exit. Suddenly, someone grabbed me by the shoulder. I screamed. The guard! I froze, and the bandaged girl suddenly jumped out into the corridor and screamed that I had stolen her clothes. This was the end. The guard barked. What are you doing? Come on, think, you're a future scientist. And then it hit me. I yawned and then asked innocently, was I sleepwalking again? The guard gave me a searching look, and then he softly said that his sister was also a sleepwalker, so we understood everything. But as soon as he took us to the ward and left, the girl shouted that she knew I was a liar and a thief. When I undressed, she took the clothes from my hands and wandered to her bed. I went to bed too, but I couldn't stop thinking about running away. I fell asleep only in the morning. An hour later, Dr. Strange woke me up. He was holding a marker in his hand. I immediately sat up. What was he going to do? The doctor said that for now, he would only point out where to fix the face. No, don't! But the nurses grabbed my arms, preventing me from escaping. Let me go, you assholes! Strange was already drawing lines on my face, and I could only turn my head helplessly. I felt like an insignificant doll. Finally, the doctor let me go. In desperation, I ran to the waiting room and asked the secretary to dial my mother. Mommy, please cancel the operation. But she only said that I was still young and did not understand. People value appearance, not intelligence. And she hung up. I had never been so depressed before, and then the girl I stole the clothes from came up to me. I shivered. What did she want? But she introduced herself as Anne and said that she had heard my conversation with my mother. I was so sad and upset, and she didn't want to talk. But Anne said she understood perfectly well why I was trying to escape. Yeah, you understand. You're sitting there bandaged up. But Anne sighed. Once she had a lot of complexes, and she decided to change her face. At first it was successful, but then Anne just couldn't stop. She had 23 surgeries. I shivered. But Anne went on. As a result, she had a tissue rejection and now the face looked more like a piece of meat. Her story made me uneasy. But Anne added optimistically that Dr. Strange was her uncle and was already helping her recover. She really wanted to get her old face back and do nothing with herself again. Yes, you can't wish that on anyone. Anne smiled sadly and said that my mother was fixated on appearance because of complexes. She should be shown what the consequences might be before it was too late. Exactly. I needed to prove to her that plastic surgery could be harmful. And then she could change her mind and let me go to college. And then I came up with some plan. I would definitely teach my mom a lesson. Anne was glad to hear about it and said she already knew how to help me. Anne soon explained everything to Dr. Strange. At first, he gave me a dismissive look, but then he agreed. It was only for Anne that he was willing to help me. I couldn't believe my luck. We prepared for a long time and the time flew by quickly. I went to the contest with my face completely bandaged. As soon as my mother saw me, she immediately wanted to look at my perfect face. But I mysteriously replied that it was not yet time. I will show myself to everyone only at the contest. And so, trembling with excitement, I went on stage and began to untie my face. After a couple of seconds, the audience gasped. I had no nose, no cheeks, no mouth. Instead of a face, a flat piece of meat. There was silence, and then I heard a scream. My mom clutched at her heart and fell. At first I thought it was a faint. She'll know how to send me to surgery. But a minute passed, and she didn't get up. Someone in the audience was leaning over to her. No pause. I heard soon after. Immediately, my vision went dark. Mom! After a couple of minutes, an ambulance arrived, and my mom was taken to the intensive care unit. Oh my god, what have I done? I listened to the beeping of the equipment in my mom's ward and was so restless. All my life I thought I was better than my mom because I was interested in science, not nail files. But it turned out that I wasn't any smarter because I hadn't even thought about her feelings. At night, I sat next to my mom's bed and prayed only that she would come to her senses. And my mom opened her eyes. I immediately rushed to hug her and in tears began to ask for forgiveness. Mommy, it's my fault. In response, my mom whispered that she was no better. She wanted to force me to disfigure my face for the sake of some contest. Suddenly, I got a text from Anne. I opened it and laughed through my tears. I still won the contest. In the contest for the best makeup. Then my mom broke down and began to cry too. She said that she wanted to fulfill her dream using me, but realized that everyone had their own life. And she let me go to college without any conditions. We hugged and we both cried. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you.